Courtney Bowie is a commercial lawyer turned innovative entrepreneur and passionate advocate for gender equality. Leading the team at her lawyer, Courtney works to support ambitious women in business through easily accessible, high-quality legal services. In 2020, Courtney won the prestigious Telstra Business Women's Award, Emerging Leader, and was named Wellness Advocate in the Lawyers Weekly 30 Under 20 Awards for her work as the founder of Ladies Who Lawyer, an online support community for women in law. Courtney is passionate about taking practical steps towards gender equality, raising awareness of mental health challenges, and working towards a sustainable future for our children. She pursues her passions through her work with her lawyer and Ladies Who Lawyer, and is also an advisory board member for the Femtech Collective and the University of Wollongong School of Law. Okay, I'll let Courtney take it away.
Thank you. I will just go ahead and share my screen. All right, can you see that?
Yeah, that looks great, no problem.
Right, fantastic. So guys, we're going to talk about navigating the legal requirements in Femtech. I know that law stuff, sometimes everyone's eyes glaze over, so I will try to keep it interesting for you. If it is becoming extremely boring, feel free to put in the chat, if it's boring, move on. So I would not be a lawyer if I did not put a little disclaimer on here. This is all general information here, guys, not individual advice. If you do need individual advice, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I feel like I don't really need to introduce myself anymore because Megan has done a really wonderful intro for me, so thank you. I will tell you a little bit about why I'm here, why I am speaking today. I think it's really important for us to have the Femtech Collective and the Femtech Innovation Summit because of the real gender gap that there is. So women are underrepresented in the startup ecosystem. And if you tuned into the panel discussion immediately prior to this session, you'd know that women are really receiving only a small amount of venture capital funding. And I'm sure with lots of founders on the line, that comes as no surprise to you. And in Australia, that opportunity represents between $70 and $135 billion just if women became equal with men. So there's lots of reasons for those gaps. I've got a bit of a list there. There's, lack of visibility, fewer professional networks, and lower confidence. Are just some of them, as well as obviously unconscious gender bias. And so what am I hoping to do about that? I know I'm only one person. However, I do have quite a bit of legal expertise, and I would absolutely love to share it with you and help you to get your legal infrastructure right and give you some education in the legal arena so that you can increase your confidence and get yourself investor ready. Bit of context, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, you're probably already intimately aware that Femtech is primarily concerned with addressing the whole lived experience of women. And I'm also going to cross over a little bit into general health tech businesses founded by women. So generally, Femtech falls within sort of these 9 categories, and they're the sort of categories that I've been thinking about in preparing my slides today, thinking about what will be most useful for you. If there is a category here that you believe is in Femtech and that I haven't touched on, I would absolutely love for you to type that in the chat for me. Otherwise, skipped most proud slide. So I've put together this Femtech landscape, and if we have any of the owners of these businesses on here, lovely to e-meet you, and I apologise for infringing your copyright by borrowing your logo. But I just thought it was really useful for everyone to see how much activity is in this space in Australia. Of course, this is non-exhaustive map, but across all those different categories, we have so many different amazing startups. There's tech, there's products, there's community-based businesses, there's more traditional clinics, there's clothing, food, everything. It's really, really amazing and diverse area. So given the diversity, it's going to be impossible for me to go really deep dive into any particular area. What I'm going to try to do today is really give you an overview of legal and business, and you'll be able to, as we go through, identify what is the most important parts for you. And I would love for you to be thinking as we go through the slides, taking down some notes for yourself on, yes, that applies to me. Yes, I need to look into that. Yes, I think that might be something that's going to come up in my future. We'll do a little activity at the end where I'm going to get you to make an action list for yourself. Okay, so I've got here the 5 business law essentials that you are going to need to know as a founder. First of all, we've got structuring. Obviously, really important to get your structure right. That is what I like to call your foundations underneath your business skyscraper. You need to get that foundation right. If you don't, the whole thing could come crumbling down on you personally. Intellectual property, obviously huge in Femtech, so we're going to spend a fair bit of time talking about that. Then we've got contracts, which is it's probably one of the more intimidating areas. It requires legal skills, but also soft skills around negotiation and deal making. So I'm just going to highlight for you some of the most common contracts that you might come across. And if you have particular questions about certain contracts, please do raise that with me. Just pop it in the chat box. We've got privacy and compliance. Obviously, that is a huge issue if you are doing anything where you're collecting health information, if you've got an app, if you're providing, if you're collecting data. There's a lot of regulation around that, as well as, more general compliance in consumer law products. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then employment and HR, we will touch on towards the end. That is a mammoth area. And I will also try to address that question that we had a little earlier. I'm just going to bring my chat up over on the screen so I can make sure that I can see your questions. Okay, so structuring, as I said, setting up your right foundations. I've just put here a couple of the most common structures. You've got your sole trader, anyone can do that. You just bang, get your ABN and you're ready to go. Partnership is usually 2 or more people in a handshake deal up to the point of having a contract. A company is where you create a different legal structure which operates your business, and you're sort of like the driver of the bus as the founder and as the director. And then a trust, I've got there a little family because often we set up a trust for tax planning purposes and also to make sure that we are setting our family up for success and to share in our success. So the most common type of most common type of structure, and what I would say 99% of you will need, is a company. I've got up here on the screen, and please feel free to jot these down. I'll also ask Megan if she can make these available to you afterwards. These are the basic quick steps to setting up your company. You need to register it. You need to have a shareholders agreement with any of your co-founders. You usually need a constitution, you need an ABN, registered business name, you need to set up your company accounts and register for tax and all those sorts of things. This is obviously the process for setting up a company in Australia. If you are setting up a company overseas, you will need to talk to a lawyer or an attorney in that company, and there's often virtual firms that can help with those steps. One final thought on structuring is that getting your accountant and your lawyer together is really important for structuring, particularly if you have really ambitious goals and you know that you are setting up a business that is going to go large, you're going to get investment, etc. You really need to be thinking around planning for the future and making sure your structure is right from the beginning. Intellectual property. So we're going to go through the different types of intellectual property. There's lots of different types. There's often some confusion between the types of intellectual property and what they do, how they arise. I'll give you a brief overview of each type, and I'm going to give you some Femtech examples of some of the more interesting ones. But if you have questions about a particular type as we go through, type it in the chat box. Okay, so on copyright arises automatically in Australia. In the US, I know that you have to register copyright, but I'm talking about Australian as I am an Australian lawyer. So copyright is generally life of the author plus 70 years, and it gives you the exclusive right to produce and publish a work, and it applies to original works that are literary, so written works, musicals, or songs, theatre, so scripts and plays, um, video recordings, and artistic works, so paintings, photography, sculpture, all sorts of areas. Trademarks are probably one of the most interesting areas for founders, apart from patents, which we'll get to. So trademarks require registration, and there is different registration requirements in each country. There's also a what we call the Madrid Protocol, which allows you to apply in multiple countries at once, which if you are planning on launching worldwide or in several different countries, that can often be a real time saver. So trademark gives you exclusive rights to use a mark in relation to certain goods and services for the life of your registration. So as long as you keep renewing it. And so most people think trademarks, well, that's my logo. What a lot of people don't know is that you need a trademark for your business name and your product name as well. Just registering a business name to trade under it doesn't give you any exclusive rights. There's also some more interesting trademarks around. So there are colour marks. So Cadbury Purple is a trademark. Sound trademarks. So Harley Davidson has got a trademark in respect of the sound of their engine. And there is also scent marks, so Chanel No. 5. So they're really interesting. And I've given you some Femtech examples here. So Avira, which is an Australian Femtech startup, they have a trademark for their name. So that's probably the most common thing that people know, get a trademark for the name. Medela have got a trademark over their slogan, Mother's Milk Every Day Amazing. And I've got here Wellfem, they have a logo trademark. They're just the types of trademarks. Patents, for a lot of founders, you will be really interested in patents because they give you a commercial monopoly over a device or a process or a methodology that is new and innovative. And they last for between 20 and 25 years, and you do have to register them. And they must be kept secret in order to register them. You can't have used them or made them publicly available in order to get your patent registered. So obviously lots of examples there: solar cells, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and pharmaceuticals. In the Femtech space, we've got the anti-cervical cancer drug Gardasil has a patent. There is Modibody has a patent for their fabric inserts in their period undies, and Medela have got lots of patents in respect of their breast pumps and breast pump accessories. Designs. This is so designs. There's some crossover between designs and copyright. It can be a really confusing area. Really important to get advice if you are looking at text and designs. Again, it requires registration. It gives you 5 to 10 years of protection and gives you the exclusive right to the visual appearance of something. Common examples are, the appearance of packaging, clothing designs, and also, the designs of bottles and containers. A couple of Femtech examples for you. You can see the Event manually operated breast pump there. The Stamina menstrual cup, there's a registered design for that menstrual cup there. And Thinks Inc., which is a US company, have a reusable tampon applicator, and they have a design in respect of the visual appearance of that. And then our final ground on the intellectual property is confidential information and trade secrets. So these are somewhat more interesting because they are not registered. The protection is sort of inherent in the sense that you keep it secret and you keep it confidential and you protect it with NDAs and with limiting access. And by the nature of it, you keep that IP as long as you can keep it secret. The most well-known trade secret is, what most well-known unknown trade secret is Coca-Cola's recipe. They have kept that secret forever, and that is why nothing else tastes like Coca-Cola. If you have any questions on the IP front, I'm going to keep moving forward, but if you do have questions about it, please type into the chat box. Talking about contracts. So to me, a contract is the building block of a great business deal. And often we have conversations, we have meetings, we have pitches, and they get us to the point of a preliminary yes. And our contract is where we really nut out what are the details of what each one of us is going to do, and how do we make this super, super clear so everyone knows what they have to do and there are no disagreements. And if there are disagreements, let's agree now on how we're going to sort them out, preferably without going to court. That's why they're really, really important. So at a foundational level, some of the key contracts you would be looking at would be an NDA, which again, if you have got a new and innovative product or process, you need to be thinking about having an NDA with anyone who is going to help you be on your team. Shareholders agreement, really important to have a shareholders agreement, whether you're a company or not, say maybe you're in the informal partnership, really important to sit down together and talk about how are we going to work together, and then record that in the document. And of course, team contracts. So these can start from, I mean, you'll have a contract with everyone, regardless of whether or not you have a piece of paper. But team contracts can go from very simple unwritten, and they can go up to really, really complex contracts. And I think somebody asked me a question before about giving out equity to advisors and to early employees. So that's where you might be moving into the area of an employee share scheme. That's something that so many founders really want to do. And the logic behind it is that, you know, you want people to really buy in and feel a sense of ownership and know that they're going to be compensated with a stake in the business. The only issue is that it is really challenging to set those up properly. You can, of course, have your informal arrangements, even documented arrangements, but a formal equity share scheme is something that takes a while and quite a bit of planning to set up. So if it is something that you're thinking about, it's good to get some advice quite early on. Just touching on that area, thinking about the employees and giving shares to your employees, definitely don't do that in the beginning without getting some advice. I've had a lot of clients get themselves into a bit of strife by giving away equity to early employees, and then the relationship breaks down, and it's really hard to get out of that relationship. If you can find other ways to motivate your staff and have them stay on and feel a sense of ownership, definitely look into those. Once we get up to the point of launch and scale, we are looking at some different types of agreements. So we've got supplier agreements. So it's something that we don't often think about, but when we are getting up to a point of scale, it's not always so easy to get the volumes of things that we need and make sure that we are going to be able to procure those in line with what we need to make our targets and meet the demand that we've worked so hard to generate. And you don't want a supplier to let you down at that point. Customer terms, that is really relevant for businesses that are going with a direct to consumer model, and also app-based businesses, so your app terms. Then we've got distribution agreements. So this would be, and these can be all types of different distribution agreements. We could be looking at, you know, an Amazon fulfillment center type service. It could also be if you get stocked in a large retailer, making sure that the terms of that are acceptable to you. Those are just a couple of types of different contracts. There's contracts everywhere. There's contracts throughout your business. No matter what you do, there'll always be a contract, whether it is written or not. My advice would be, if you think it's a contract, get it in writing. Thinking now, I'm actually making some great time on here. I'm going to have lots of time for questions, which is fantastic. So thinking about privacy and compliance, that is a really tricky area. So we are always wanting to work within the regulatory landscape, and Femtech is new but not new. So the regulatory landscape is evolving and shifting. So it's important to understand the areas that are known and are settled, and to be keeping up to date with changes in the law and making sure that you are complying with everything. So we'll get into privacy, which is particularly thinking around apps and data and being online. Privacy is something that really permeates everything you do. And depending on where you are based and where your customers are based, you've got a lot of regulation that you're working within. Privacy, particularly digital privacy, is something that is taken very seriously these days, and people are very concerned about it. And there's lots of advocates for further regulation. So it's something that you really have to be up on and be conscious of. So in Australia, we have the Australian Privacy Act. We have the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. And in the US, we have COPPA and HIPAA. HIPAA are particularly applicable with health tech. And some of the areas where that's going to impact you is, things that you're going to have to produce, things like privacy policies, collection notices, and setting up active consent forms. That's just the things that you have to produce. There's a lot more that you need to have running in the back end and making sure that you are ticking those off. So making sure that you have someone responsible for privacy in your organization will be really, really important. On compliance, so this is really going to depend on where you are located. If you are in Australia, you've got the Australian Consumer Law. So here we have a minimum set of guarantees that consumers of goods get here. It's generally goods that are worth under $40,000, which is quite all-encompassing. And there are certain obligations that you have as a provider of those goods or services in terms of responding to customers and providing refunds or remedies. So if you are launching a product or a service in the Australian market that's going to be personal, domestic or household or under $40,000 a pop, then my recommendation would be to jump onto the Consumer Law website and familiarise yourself with that law. We've also got some unfair contract legislation in Australia, which is really good for small businesses in particular. So we need to think about it from two perspectives. We need to think about it from the perspective of our customers and making sure that we are not imposing unfair contract terms on them. Unfair contract terms might be, for example, a term which would allow you to terminate your service to them at any time and they get no refunds. On the other hand, as a business, if you qualify as a small business, then you have certain entitlements and guarantees that you get, and you can force negotiations for better, more favourable terms for you. Also in Australia, we have therapeutic claims legislation. So being able to make a therapeutic claim requires registration. And if you are not in a position to go ahead and become TGA registered, then you need to be very, very careful about the types of claims that you're making. And it's a bit of a wishy-washy line here. Unfortunately, there's not great guidance on what is a therapeutic claim and what's not. So it's best to get an expert to help you check your websites, your packaging, etc. And along the same lines, we have some pretty strict labelling laws here, particularly around skincare and food products. And also regulations around testing and certification. I told you there was a lot of regulation. There's a lot of regulation. So my advice would be to get your advice from your individual advisor early and understand your regulatory landscape and what you are up against, and factor in the cost of compliance. The cost of compliance can be quite high. And we are at employment and HR. So finding and keeping your dream team is something that can be extremely challenging. It can also be extremely rewarding. So a couple of things that I would love for you to be thinking about when you are thinking about your team is thinking about the status of your workers. So often when we start out, we are wanting to engage people as contractors. because that means that we're not an employer and we don't have to take on all those extra responsibilities as an employer, particularly in Australia, you know, a commitment to offering work, having to comply with the national employment standards and minimum rates of pay and the modern awards, duties to consult, and so on and so forth. It can become very expensive and very stressful. So a lot of people like to engage their workers as contractors. If you categorize and pay someone as a contractor when they are rightfully categorized as an employee at law, you are doing what we call sham contracting. And the regulators and lawmakers are not a fan of this at all. In fact, in Queensland and a couple of other states, it's actually illegal to do that, and it carries a jail term. Obviously, that'd be pretty bad violation to end up in jail, but still something to indicate how seriously the regulators are taking this. So really important to familiarise yourself with what is an employee and what is a contractor, and be only engaging someone the right way. In the same realm, there's often something I get asked about is volunteers. Volunteers can be a really tricky area, and the last thing that you want to do is have a whole lot of volunteers and then end up having to back pay them because they were actually legally an employee, didn't have the right things in place. So if you are looking at getting volunteers, get some advice around that. Your contracts with your staff are really important. As I said, there will always be a contract in place whether you have a piece of paper or not. And even if you only have a one-pager, that's still a valid contract. Some of the terms that we like to see in your contracts are obligations around confidentiality, assignment of IP is really, really important, as is a restraint of trade if you have someone in a position where they are privy to your confidential information and trade secrets. That would be absolutely critical. And not forgetting as well, lots of people forget to have a contract between their company and themselves and their founders. That's something that you really do need as well. It's something that's often overlooked, but it's important. As I touched on earlier, there are national employment standards which are set out in the Fair Work Act here in Australia. They give people minimum entitlements as an employee in Australia, and that's things like annual leave, sick leave, domestic violence leave, entitlements to, goodness me, they've just all jumped out of my head, but all of the minimum standards are in there. And then our modern awards layer on top of that. So depending on what award you fall under, and if you are covered by an award, which lots of roles are, you get extra entitlements on top of the national employment standards. So for example, that might be extra minimum wage, it might be extra entitlements to breaks, particular requirements around consulting or dispute resolution. So really important to make sure that if you are becoming an employer in Australia, that you familiarise yourself with the national employment standards. And your responsibilities as an employer, you also need to think about, and this is not just as an employer either, but health and safety. And I know that a lot of modern founders are starting in a co-working space, starting a virtual business. So thinking about virtual health and safety is something that has been on my mind for many years. And ensuring, for example, in a post-COVID world, that everyone has got their rights set up at home, and thinking about those health and safety consequences, as well as mental health and wellness. They're things that you are responsible to take care of in your business, and understanding your obligations under workplace health and safety laws, and also understanding the obligations of your staff, because they have obligations too, including an obligation to take care of themselves. Making sure that you're on top of that, and of course you have your insurances. So making sure that you have your workers' compensation insurance, and that varies in Australia between state to state. And finally, managing your staff. So I see a lot of small businesses and startups can get into a position where they, have made the wrong hire, and that's just about experience. If you've made the wrong hire and you're desperately trying to unwind the wheel and get rid of them, it can be really challenging. And that's not just from a communications perspective. Of course, that is really important too. But there's a lot of a legal tightrope walking that you need to follow. You cannot just say to someone, you know, one day you come in and say, I'm sick of you, you're annoying, get out of my sight. That is not going to fly. There is potential for them to make an unfair dismissal claim. We have general protections claims here as well as you know, strong discrimination laws, which are often used by employees who've been let go. They can, you know, make claims around discrimination, which is, as an employer, receiving a fair work complaint claim can be extremely distressing, takes up a lot of time and a lot of money. So my advice would be train yourself up in this area, educate yourself. If in doubt, get advice, because that is going to be money well spent versus if you have to deal with a disgruntled employee after the fact, that's going to be stressful, time consuming, lots of money, and it's not going to leave you in a better place. All right. I might jump in and do a couple of questions first, and then we might do a bit of an activity. How does that sound, Megan?
Yeah, fantastic. Happy for you to take the lead.
Great. And I feel like I've covered off everything, but gone quite quickly through all those different points. So if anyone would like me to circle back to an area, please do ask me. I will say also I am an Australian lawyer, so I can probably give a little bit of guidance around some of these questions that might relate to overseas. But unfortunately, I can't give advice or really be much help on the international side. Okay, so I'm just going to jump in. Equity to advisors and early employees. Was that from you, Megan?
I think that was from Nicole.
From Nicole, okay. So I think we touched on that a little bit in the contract session, maybe in structuring. So most people do equity to early employees as part of an a employee share scheme. As I said, really complex thing to set up. It's not ideal. If you can find another way to compensate your early employees and get their buy-in, I would investigate that as a first point of call. For example, I know that there's a company that sets up equity employee share schemes in my co-working space, and they say the average price for that is $20,000, which I know when you're a founder, that's not really going to be accessible. But giving equity to advisors, that's a really interesting one. Whether the advisor is also an investor, it's so challenging because you've got to, if they're an investor, you've got to put a dollar figure on what that's worth. Really challenging. I don't like giving away equity. I think it's really difficult. You have to really think about whether that advisor is going to help you grow the pie and that it's going to be better for you in the long run to have a smaller piece of a much larger pie as opposed to the whole of your pie. Jeanette has asked about considerations around conflicts of interest and how to get engaged with startups when you work in both corporate and with hospitals and doctors that would purchase technology or FEM and health tech. Jeanette, are you still on the line?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I'll look at my actual.
Nice to meet you. And whereabouts are you based, Jeanette?
In Melbourne, but moved here about 5 years from the States. So yeah, I've wanted to get pretty engaged in some of these startups and and talk to them. I've been in health IT for 20 years now, but so it's like I should be looking, and I feel like about some helping on some boards or helping do some advice for some of these companies. But it seems I'm always a little afraid from a conflict of interest standpoint, like where does that line actually get crossed? When you have, like I said, I've got relationships with a lot of the CEOs and CIOs and purchasers from a hospital perspective. And again, working for a company, we sell software to them. And it's kind of like, where does that line get, where's that line from a conflict of interest? Like when does it become advice versus a conflict of interest versus those lines, I guess.
Absolutely. And what's your background, Jeanette? Are you in professional services, software engineering?
Professional services. So I basically have the governance and oversight over our implementations in Australia, and I also run a strategy team. So
yeah, wow.
Strategic
Yeah,
consulting.
I can see the conundrum you're in. Sometimes you find that your contracts specifically deal with conflict of interest. So if you look at your contracts with corporates and with the hospitals, that would be my first point of call. I would then be looking at internal policies. So speaking with HR and saying, do you have a conflict of interest policy? Failing that, I'd probably talk with my, closest colleague and around who in this organization should I talk to around conflict of interest. And I find sometimes transparency is the best policy. And if you think it might be a conflict of interest, just treat it as if it is a conflict of interest. But do you feel like this is stopping you from getting engaged with startups?
It makes me a little nervous in getting engaged where it's, yeah.
Yeah, that can be challenging. I know for me, my, coming on board with Femtech, I'm on their advisory board, and I was thinking, okay, well, could there be a bit of an issue here with me sitting on the board? And I sort of just made sure that in our agreement, it was quite clear what my role was, and what I would and wouldn't do. So just being transparent, having documentation can be helpful.
Yeah.
Does that exist?
Yeah. No, that helps. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Kevin, back to you. Lots of thoughts here. So moving all IP to a Bahamas corporation or Cayman Islands. So interesting. I have not been, I don't think I've specifically been asked this before. I actually know someone over there.
I can clarify. I mean, have you heard of this before?
Not moving IP. I thought that a lot of people moved cash assets over there.
Right. So this is what I've heard from a friend. He said that like this is what all the big companies like the Facebook and the Google that what they do is they'll create a new company out of the Cayman Islands and then assign all of the IP, trademarks, etc., to the Cayman Islands company and then pay licensing fees. And that's the way that's the legal way to technically like move all of your money offshore or something. I don't know. Like it seems super shady to me, but like everyone does it apparently. So yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've also heard a lot about companies setting up in, I think it's Ireland, has got a really low tax base. It's not my area of expertise. I would talk to a tax expert about that, and even an international tax expert. And I mean, that's why your Facebooks and everything have got that, because they've got these international tax experts on the payroll, figuring out how to set those arrangements up.
Okay. Sorry, just thought I'd ask because it combines like the whole IP thing and the other stuff you were talking about.
Structuring, yeah. It can be challenging. I was chatting to a tax accountant colleague yesterday, and I think what we had discussed was setting up companies in each area of operation and then having a holding company somewhere doing that IP movement. But I'd say that was fairly, you've got to be expecting enough income to make that worthwhile of the setup costs.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, if it's not your area, like it's, yeah, I thought it was like just an interesting.
It is. It's really
everyone seems to.
And hiring customers to do work and paying them in product. Interesting. I would say that it'd probably be, you'd set it up as maybe an influencer arrangement. Depends what kind of work they're going to do. If they're going to, say, do promotions, that kind of thing, I'd say that would probably be an influencer contract rather than an employment. I think we've got a couple of minutes left, so I might just jump into a quick activity, if that's all right. It's quite basic. I would just love for you guys to do a little audit for yourselves. So just grab a tablet or pen and paper, and we've got the 5 different categories here of structuring. So remember that's the structure, the entity that is going to operate your business. We've got your intellectual property. That's your copyright, trademarks, patents, designs, confidential information, and trade secrets. Contracts. So with your staff, with your suppliers, distributors, manufacturers, coaches, accountants, anyone else you can think of, basically. Privacy and compliance. So the areas of, digital privacy, collecting health information, and then compliance, making claims, dealing with complaints, product recalls. And then we've got employment and HR, which is dealing with your team members. So what I would love for you to do is to, under each of those 5 categories, think about what do you already have in place here. So what's the current state? So what currently is your structure? What IP do you know that you already have? What contracts do you already have in place? What privacy and compliance measures have you already got in place? And who's already on your team, or where are they at? What's the status of them? And then I would like you, once you have done that, I would like you to think about what might you need. Where do you see you've got some gaps so far? For example, you might be thinking, well, I'm operating as a sole trader and that's not the right entity for growth. I probably need to upgrade my structure. You might be thinking, okay, well, I've got some marks that I'm using in my business, and I've got a nice logo that I really love, or I've got a really cool name, and I might need to take some steps to register. You might need to think about talking to a patent attorney or someone who knows about registered designs and get some help and find out, can I get a patent or a design? You might also think about, okay, well, this is the confidential information that I've got. What's my secret source? I was talking to someone yesterday who was in the early stages of setting up a new pet food product. And I said to them, look, a patent of design is probably not going to help you, but your recipe, the ingredients, the amounts, the way that you put them together, that is your secret sauce. That is the value of your business. It's really important that you keep that secret. Recipes are a classic example. So making sure that you've got an NDA to protect those. If you don't have an NDA, if you haven't already ticked off NDA on your list, put NDA on there. Just thinking about key contracts. So what might you need? So if you don't have a contract with a key person on your team, have a think about what contracts you might need to put in place. Even if you just identify 1 or 2 things that will be important as part of that relationship. For example, I need to make sure that Joe Blogs can continue to supply me with plastic. A strange example. Thinking back again about to refresh my own memory. Privacy and compliance. So do you know what privacy legislation applies to you? If not, you need to go and find that out. Compliance wise, do you know what areas of compliance apply to you? Go and find that out. Employment and HR, where might you be missing things like, as we were talking about with Kevin, where might you be missing things like workplace policies? Do you know about the employment law in your jurisdiction? Do you understand things like minimum wage and minimum entitlements? Do you know the true cost of hiring an employee? Give yourself a little bit of action plan there. What might be a risk in the future? So if you've got things that you think could be a risk, if you've ever done a SWOT analysis, we'll be talking down here in threats and thinking about what could happen. Classic example would be, what if we have a massive data breach and all of the info from our app is released? How can we manage that risk? And think about that risk and note it down and do some research on it and think about, what do I need to do to protect against this risk? Who do I need to talk to who can help me? And then also thinking about what might future opportunities require. So if you are, thinking, okay, well, I'm going to launch my product in Australia, but I know that once I'm successful here, I'm going to launch immediately into New Zealand and then into the US. You might be thinking, okay, so I need to look at international trademarks. I need to look at, how do I operate a business in the US? Do I set up a company in the US? Over there as well. Who can I talk to? Who can help me? All right, and then at the end, you are going to have yourself an action plan and put down a couple of steps of things that you can do this week that are going to take you closer to having the solid foundation for your business and feeling safe and secure moving forward. Thank you, Claudia. That's a lovely comment. And she has to hop off. That's been informative and a pleasure to listen to. So I hope that was helpful. Megan, thank you so much for having me. I hope that has been useful to everyone. Happy to chat to anyone who needs a bit more support.
Yeah, thank you so much, Courtney. That was so enlightening and so insightful. Even going through that, I feel like there's so much more we need to talk about for implementing for the Femtech Collective. So thank you so much for that. And again, if you guys are at all interested in Courtney and her services, do have a look at her website, which we'll include in the wrap. You can also contact her at info@herlawyer.com.au, which has just also been added in the chat. Thanks, Nicole. So do check her out. She's got some fantastic services and she's helped us a lot as well. So we definitely recommend.